On behalf of the European Foundation for Democracy, I would like to welcome you all to our webinar organized in cooperation with the US Mission to the EU and Young Professionals in Foreign Policy. YPFP, Atlantic Treaty Association, and Youth Atlantic Treaty Association Facebook pages are also broadcasting this event through Facebook. I would like to thank them all for this cooperation too. Disinformation and propaganda campaigns during the COVID-19 crisis have once again shown why we should take the threat of disinformation and fake news seriously. Such campaigns, led by the authoritarian countries, target Western societies and our liberal democratic values. Our speakers will explore this issue and the dynamic behind it today. We have two excellent speakers joining us. Raimonda Miglinaite from the Stratcom task force of the European External Action Service, and Fabrizio Luciolli, president of the Atlantic Treaty Association. We also have Maria Sulte from YPFP Brussels with us for introductory remarks on behalf of the YPFP. We will start with Maria, and then our speakers will open the session by their analysis for about 10 minutes each. Then we will continue with a Q&A. You can type and send your questions and comments by using the Q&A box on your screen during and after these presentations. Maria, thank you again for this cooperation. It's always a pleasure to cooperate with YPFP as a former member.
Thank you, Murat. Hi, everyone. So my name is Maria Sulte. I'm a Security and Defense Officer at the Young Professionals in Foreign Policy, or YPFP, Brussels branch. And thank you very much to the European Foundation for Democracy and to the USCU for cooperating with us on this event. So for those of you who are joining externally and don't know much about YPFP, so we are a global organization that aims to build the future leaders in foreign policy. It's located across the world, and it brings professionals together with key stakeholders and decision makers to discuss foreign policy and various pertinent topics. YPFP Brussels is one of the core branches of YPFP, and it's of course situated in the heart of European politics, and it aims to connect its members to key issues and key stakeholders who are at the forefront of these issues. So YPFP Brussels hosts over 40 events per year, and they are a wide array of events ranging from ambassador series where our members can meet ambassadors and discuss foreign policy topics, but also practical workshops on career skills, briefing lectures on various issues, etc. So if you're a young professional who is looking for broadening their spectrum in foreign policy and meeting like-minded people, YPFP would be a perfect place for you. So please consider joining us. Today's event is a great example of the type of discussions and events that YPFP organizes as well as cooperates with partners on. So, for example, our partnership with the EFD and USCU have been key partnerships. Just to throw a couple of my own sense into the discussion is, I think this is a fascinating topic. Disinformation and propaganda are old phenomena that appear to become particularly alluring as a political tool to certain actors in times of crises. So in my opinion, when a situation becomes difficult to understand and control, or there's little information about it, it produces a lot of anxiety to people. And one of the ways for people to deal with this is to search for information about it. When information is not readily available, like during this pandemic, and there are so many questions about where the virus came from, when the pandemic will be over, if there's going to be a second wave or not, it produces a lot of uncertainty, and it also opens up space for various actors to use narratives for their own political gains. So some of these rumors, of course, have been about the origin of the virus. Rumors have been about the vaccine development. We've seen rumors about medication. And social media, of course, also helps these rumors disseminate and gain traction and power, which makes it even easier for certain actors to capitalize on them and use them in a political way. So I think this is a fascinating topic, and I'm really looking forward to the speaker's remarks and the following discussion. Thanks again, everyone, and back to you, Murat.
Thank you again, Maria. Raimonda, we will start with you. Raimonda will tell us about her task force and why the European Union is taking this issue seriously. Thank you again for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for everyone who's tuned in and listening, probably after your work hours. So I hope you will find this interesting. So my name is Raimonda. I work at the Stratcom, at the External Action Strategic Communications Division, but more specifically at the Stratcom Task Force. And I will use some time to tell you more about what we do specifically as a team, and also a little bit broader in how EU is tackling the issue of disinformation. And you might have heard some of the things before, so I'm also looking forward to your questions. So the East Stratcom Task Force is essentially a communications team that was established in 2015 when European heads of states and governments of the European Union member states adopted European Council conclusions. And in those conclusions, they stressed the need to challenge Russia's ongoing disinformation campaigns. And establishing a communication team was the first step in this regard. So EU leaders gave a very specific mandate and a task for us as a team to challenge Russia's ongoing disinformation campaigns. Now, if you think back to March 2015, you perhaps remember the political and geopolitical context at the time. This was roughly a year since the illegal annexation of Crimea. This was in the context of ongoing aggression by the Russian armed forces in East Ukraine. This was 8 months after the downing of Malaysian flight MH17. So all these events that were accompanied by overwhelming disinformation campaigns, and particularly aggression in Ukraine, where disinformation indeed played a key role. So this is a context in which leaders understand that disinformation indeed is a challenge and that it needs a European response. So the team was established and it had a clear task. But of course, then another task was to figure out, indeed, how does one challenge disinformation? What is an effective and a legitimate way for us as a part of EU's diplomatic service to challenge Russia's ongoing disinformation campaigns? So in consultation with international experts, sort of three major directions of the work have been defined, and these three directions essentially guide our work today. So firstly, it was clear that the task force should make EU's own communication more effective with a special focus on Eastern Partnership countries because of the political context. The logic here is that if people should be made more resilient to disinformation, for example, about EU and Ukraine relations, then it makes sense to raise their level of knowledge about what is EU and what it does. So we're working very closely with EU delegations in Eastern Partnership countries to try to make this communication more effective. The second broad strand of work is strengthening free and independent media with a particular focus again on the region. Here we work very closely with our colleagues in the European Commission. And the logic here is that media is really the most important and ultimate defense against disinformation. Trusted, independent media upholding high journalistic standards. It is what people read, it is what people trust. And so the stronger the media, the more resilient the society to the disinformation. And finally, the third strand of work is that we should raise awareness of the disinformation as a challenge itself by running an advocacy campaign. So the team is probably best known for its website called EU versus Disinfo, as well as its social media accounts, which is exactly how we try to raise the awareness by collecting, monitoring, and analyzing pro-Kremlin disinformation and collecting specific examples in the pro-Kremlin media, analyzing them and framing them in a way that does not reinforce but challenge disinformation. And we collect these examples in a publicly available database which as of today has over 8,000 examples. And now if everything works right, I will try to share my screen with you so you can see what it is that we do. So you should now be able to see the EU versus Disinfo website, and on that website you see a special section which is a Disinfo database, which is public, as I said, and easily searchable. So every week we release a newsletter, what we call a disinformation review, and if you haven't yet, I encourage you to subscribe, where we sort of analyze the latest trends in disinformation and put these examples of specific messages in a broader context. We also do certain analysis of the broader trends of how certain narratives appear, how they're communicated both to the Russian domestic audience, but also in audiences in the Eastern Partnership, as well as broader audiences, for example, in the EU or even in the US. We are also working, coming back to the idea that we need to make our own communication more efficient, or EU's communication more efficient. We're also try to be present on social media and try to raise awareness of the issues. And here I will, if you will, I will use the trick of showing you a video, and not any video, but sort of internet's favorite video with cats that we produced actually during the height of the COVID-19 crisis, which, as you know, was accompanied by what the World Health Organization called an infodemic. So the idea is to encourage people to think critically before sharing information on the social media, sort of in an effort to help and stem the infodemic. So this is a video that you will see. It has two parts. This is the second part, which basically encourages people to ask critical questions. Don't worry, it's under a minute, so it's not going to take long. Yeah, so this is just one of the products that we have produced, and one of our recent ones. But coming back to the work that we do, so as I said initially, the team focused quite a lot on disinformation that we saw targeting specifically Ukraine because of the external circumstances and what was happening there. But over the years, we've seen, of course, pro-Kremlin disinformation target much broader array of topics, and also those that were particularly at the heart of political debates in Europe, for example, like migration. We did a lot of awareness raising and analysis of pro-Kremlin disinformation when it comes to European elections. Also topics such as climate change, events like the chemical attack in Salisbury, which was also followed, as you know, by an overwhelming disinformation campaign, and of course, more recently, the COVID-19. Now, let me just say a few words about the EU's response. So the team was established as the first sort of focal point to respond to the challenge of disinformation, but it soon became clear that disinformation is an issue that concerns not just EU's eastern part and not just its Eastern Partnership. And that recognition was cemented in late 2018 when the European Union adopted action plan against disinformation. And in the action plan, there were defined 4 pillars on how Europe should effectively address disinformation. And these pillars are quite important because they still largely shape collective work today. First, it was agreed that we need to improve our detection and analysis capabilities. So, for example, for our team, that meant more focus on data analysis, more professional media monitoring. It was also recognized that to respond to disinformation, it is necessary to ensure effective cooperation between the EU institutions and member states to create joint responses. So a rapid alert system was created. It's a system where focal points from the member states can share relevant information about disinformation and influence operations that they detect. Another very important pillar was related to private sector, because there was a recognition that private sector as well has to take responsibility for tackling disinformation. You might have heard about the EU's Code of Practice, which is a first worldwide industry standard where big platforms such as Facebook, such as Twitter and Google agree upon voluntary standards to fight disinformation. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw results of that, where the platforms try to promote authoritative sources from the authorities, demote false information. Of course, much still remains to be done, but the foundation was there. And finally, the action plan also foreseen that we should continue to raise awareness and build social resilience throughout Europe. And as we're talking today, it's actually also a significant time period because yesterday, you might be aware of this, European Commission and the External Action Service announced a joint communication on tackling disinformation, COVID-19 disinformation. So I think by now you've probably heard a lot about the various conspiracy theories and rumors and false misleading health information that really became the focus in the last few months. So I think the good thing, or sort of the silver lining in all of the situation, we saw that the work that has been done before in the European Union since 2015 and then since 2018 kind of build a certain foundation. So there was certain structures already in place that allowed us to address the infodemic as the WHO defined it. So the joint communication that I mentioned just a few minutes earlier basically reinforced the principles of our work, stressed the need to further strengthen strategic communication, further strengthen cooperation between the institutions and the member states, as well as with the other stakeholders like fact checkers, researchers, civil society organizations. Also cooperation with the international partners like NATO, G7, also the World Health Organization. It also stressed a need to further encourage transparency of the online platforms. Of course, there was some progress in promoting authoritative information, but still arguably there's not enough access to relevant data to researchers to be able to research this, for example, disinformation campaigns, either health related or otherwise. So there still needs to be some progress there. The joint communication also acknowledged the need to further support fact checkers, researchers, freedom of expression and pluralistic debate. So it's quite a comprehensive document. It defines the next steps, so to speak, in the short term, and also will feed European EU policy decisions in the longer term when it comes to, for example, Digital Services Act. So if you're curious about how the next standards for the platforms to deal with the disinformation will be drawn, I encourage you to follow the debate. I would like to maybe stop here because a lot could be said also about the content of COVID-19 disinformation, and I've seen you yourselves have seen quite a lot. So I'm happy to touch upon that during the questions and maybe show some more examples of the work that we have done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raimonda. We will continue with our next speaker. Fabrizio will end transatlantic perspective and why this issue requires a transatlantic response as well. Fabrizio, once again, thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Murat. Thank you very much, and thank you, Raimonda, for your insight from the EU perspective. That is a perspective that has to work very in common and jointly with the other international organization, as you said. I would like to focus a little bit more on some, to share some comments with you regarding how these disinformation campaigns, misinformation also that is going hand in hand with this global health crisis is affecting our national security and international stability. Because this is a key point, because it's something vicious that maybe public opinion doesn't feel immediately as an aggression, as an attack that can come, let's say, by a rocket or something very visible in a conventional way. But this is something that is making an erosion of our bedrocks and fundamental values of freedom of our societies, and also affecting this COVID-19 pandemic crisis is affecting many, let's say, civilian aspects of the concept of security. Not only the economy, not only, let me say, even the gender issue, when we see the increasing of the violence at home during lockdown to women, but also if we look to education, to children, and so on. But particularly when we are talking about information and disinformation, manipulation of information from state actors and non-state actors, this is becoming a real and serious national security issue and affecting international stability. The environment was actually already before the pandemic crisis a breeding ground, let me say, because there was a kind of deglobalization for some aspect. We have assist also of a kind of, during the pandemic crisis, of a nationalizations of medical equipment. And there was a problem between, for instance, Italy and Germany in this respect at the very beginning. And as I said, these disinformation campaigns that are looking to erode, which are the fundamental pillars of our free societies, open and free societies based in circulation of information and so on, has been carried out specifically by some specific state actors, and Raimonda is probably looking to outline some key examples that they investigated with their team. And so there was a real infodemic, as in February of the current year, the WHO organization was defining. It's an infodemic campaign that is looking to discredit the Western government action, to create and magnifying social tension, to undermine official media, and so to have a lack of trust by the public opinion in the official media. And this has an immediate impact in the short term, because take an example how the delay in the information or manipulation of the information about the virus was preventing countries to adopt the necessary measures and to be much more prepared. And but also in the long term, as I say, you have an impact that goes in terms of the erosion of the trust on the public authorities and the government and so on. This disinformation campaign is carried out, if we look at now how to address effectively this issue, we need to check that it's coming 88% from social media and the new modern and social media. This is a study that is coming from the Reuters Institute for Study of Journalism that is based in the University of Oxford. They were making a detailed analysis, and from this analysis you can see that the 88% is coming from the modern social media, and just the 9%, for instance, from televisions and from the traditional media like newspaper is the 8%. But Russia and China are exploiting this situation, sometimes in a mutually reinforcing way, retweeting and reinforcing the misinformation from one country, tweeted or circulated by one country in respect to the other one. What is interesting to say regarding Russia, the role of Russia in China, is that Russia, of course, they invented the disinformation, the disinformatia. It's a trademark coming from the early last century from themselves. And they are using propaganda and disinformation made by specific websites, and sometimes also from some real connected state TV channels or tools of information. And that was circulating conspiracy theories or fake news, like disinformation, like, I don't know, the Slovakian prime minister is affected by COVID-19 instead of a US soldier that was deployed in Lithuania. It's interesting, very interesting to see what is the approach of China, because before this pandemic crisis, I was checking, and China was not acting as Russia, was just targeting a specific with manipulation of information, censorship, or disinformation, just specific issues close to the China government interest. That was, for instance, Tibet, Taiwan, Hong Kong. But now they are addressing in an aggressive way, with the real propaganda, like the Russian Federation, using all the possible tools, even if in China, differently from Russia, social media like Twitter are forbidden. And you can see Chinese ambassadors instead of the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that are circulating and real false news. For instance, that the virus of COVID-19 was originated by some US soldiers instead even of Italy. Italy, when anyway they were trying to make a propaganda campaign through a kind of a new medical diplomacy, promoting so the model of a Chinese authoritarianism has an effective one, and so providing Italy with some face masks and sometimes also with the medical devices that was not working. So what is the outcome? Just to come back to the dangerous, how dangerous is this infodemic campaign. The outcome, if I look to a country like Italy, in a recent survey that has been made just 2 months ago, we have seen that the Italians were thinking, the 52% of the Italians were considering China as a friendly country. And only the 32% was saying the same regarding the United States. On the contrary, Germany was considered as an enemy country by the 45% of the Italians, and only the 38% was considering as enemy country France, and 36% of the Italian people were looking to have a stronger ties with China, and the 30% also with the United States. So again, I would like to outline, and I will conclude these short comments, that it's very important to address, maybe not only to respond, and here is maybe Raimonda that can provide us with more details on what his task force is doing, his Stratcom task force is doing. NATO has a center of excellence based in Riga regarding strategic communication. And recently, the Supreme, let's say the Todd Walter, that is the Supreme General that NATO has in Europe, was pushing to include, for instance, in the training, the military training for operations, also how to manage data, how to protect ourselves from, first of all, to our data to be exploited, because another issue that is connected to infodemic is also the issue of big data, of the manipulation, the exploitation of the big data. Just to give an example, There was a test that made very clear how easy it is to understand, for instance, which are the military personnel that is making an exercise or is deployed here or there, because we are taking picture and posting them to Facebook, we are tweeting something and regarding specific issues. And so this has been used, for instance, by the Russian Federation connected networks, even to make phone calls to the wife of these soldiers or to hack some website of a specific network. So here I think that NATO and the European Union should work shoulder by shoulder as they are doing now. And from the transatlantic perspective, we have let's say from the NATO point of view, not a big amount of money to devote to this, to countering disinformation. The public diplomacy division of NATO is not founded as the European Union one, and also the Center of Excellences are must be self-sustainable. But maybe we need to start thinking to have not only a reactive strategy in this issue, but maybe to start looking to a much more proactive strategy that is going maybe to take some lesson learned from what the United States is doing in the cyber domain, where they are launching a policy and testing this policy of a permanent engagement. So to go and to engage continuously those that are circulating this disinformation and manipulation, but of course the truth and the circulation of the real information is the best way. There is an area that sometimes, and I will conclude, is not considered, but I was impressed, and is something really very interesting, where we can work immediately. Because among the non-state actors that are circulating the information, I was surprised to see that politicians and celebrities, they count for the 20% of the people that are sometimes circulating misinformation. So not false information, but information that are not correct, that are creating confusion. And this 20% of this information that they are circulating, they have actually an engagement up to the 69%. So they are really effective in their communication. And I think that it will be quite easy to address effectively at least these target groups. So in conclusion, what I want to say is that once again, we have seen how is relevant the impact of this disinformation campaign on our national security and international stability. We need to consider that you can attack a society, a country, with one rocket, one shot in a conventional way, and this is something visible to everybody. But you can also die from several small injuries day by day, and by the erosion of our fundamental values, by putting a confusion on the public opinion, on the trust and how they have to trust the official media and authorities. So I think that what the European Union is doing in terms of, for instance, the European Democracy Action Plan, on which they are working in this very moment till the end of the year, it's very important. But at the same time, we have also to take into consideration that we need not to trespass some limits that are going to affect also our fundamental freedoms on which our free society are based. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabrizio. So I would like to turn back to Raimonda. First of all, as you mentioned, yes, we will be happy to hear a bit more about like concrete examples about this information. But also there's a question, maybe we can connect these two issues. So you have been following the issue for last few years. So what was the peak point of this information? Is it COVID-19? There were also other developments that we've seen. The disinformation efforts have been increasing. So in what sense can we say that COVID-19 was special?
Thank you very much. It's a good question. Let me start by saying that it is very hard to quantify disinformation. You can count a number of tweets or retweets or a number, for example, of bot accounts that were taken down, but really how illustrative that numbers are as such. Of course, as I said, for example, we record the examples of pro-Kremlin disinformation, and since the outbreak of coronavirus, we have cataloged over 500 of them, but that is not to say that that's the whole scope, of course. What makes COVID-19 situation special, and I think why WHO said that it was also an infodemic, I think it also has to do something with our own cognition and cognitive biases. So let me preface that by saying that disinformation as such exploits our vulnerabilities wherever they are, whether they're questions of transparency, for example, on social media, or whether these are some kind of vulnerabilities in the way we perceive world. Viruses or diseases as such, or pandemic as such, is a very fertile ground for disinformation. First of all, it is a highly alarming subject that touches each of us personally. And there is research, for example, that shows that threat-related rumors spread faster than any other kind of rumors. And we know that disinformation also feeds off emotion. So, of course, the news of this pandemic with unknown virus and what it could cause, naturally it's alarming, and it also kind of fuels disinformation there. The topic, of course, is highly complex, as we know by now, and it also requires very specific scientific knowledge. So for a lot of people, what we read on social media, it will not be immediately clear whether that's true or false, because we require some kind of knowledge. And that's why, especially I think in this situation, the role of trustworthy journalism and of fact-checking was so important. Because to make up a conspiracy theory, you can do it very fast. You don't need really any facts or evidence, right? But to provide authoritative information, that does require some research, and that takes time. Which leads me to my third point, why this is a special, sort of a perfect storm in a way for disinformation. The situation is constantly developing. There is a lot of uncertainty, and we as humans tend to want immediate answers. But in this situation, there are no immediate answers. Science takes time. And so there's a certain vacuum, if I may say cognitive vacuum, that is then potentially easy to fill with disinformation. Sort of reacting a little bit to what Fabrizio said about disinformation being an old invention, I'd like to remind you that one of the most prominent, probably, if you will, disinformation campaigns, by then it was known as active measures, was this KGB hoax about AIDS being created by Pentagon, by the Americans. So this health-related information, and that was in 1980s, right? So this health-related information really does something to our minds, but that it is prone to disinformation. We also know, for example, American Journal of Public Health in 2018 published a research which shows that trolls from the St. Petersburg troll factory, you probably have heard of it, also we're tweeting in the vaccine debate in Twitter from 2014 to 2017, tweeting both on anti-vax and pro-vaccine side, using it as a wedge to promote discord in American society. So coming back to disinformation, I think or COVID-19 disinformation, the situation sort of exposed our vulnerabilities. And because it was a fertile ground, actors, for example, pro-Kremlin media, exploited an opportunity. If the audiences could be potentially convinced, for example, that any vaccine is actually a secret plot by Bill Gates or a secret elite that controls the government, or that vaccines might be an attempt to reduce or control the global population, that essentially undermines trust in any public authority, including health authorities. And it's clear that that's going to have repercussions long after the pandemic is also over. We've also seen, coming back a little bit to the examples, at the outbreak of the coronavirus, we've seen pro-Kremlin media suggest that the virus was man-made, that it was made in NATO-sponsored laboratories, and that also shows a little bit of a tactics. You might know, especially those who are interested in the Eastern Partnership region, that in Tbilisi, there's a Center for Disease Control, or also known as the Lugar Lab. So it's I think a level 3, not sure, level 3. I think a laboratory which researches viruses and diseases in efforts to prevent them. And that lab has been a target of pro-Kremlin disinformation for many years. So, and this narrative that there is a secret lab which produces viruses and contributes to epidemics was already there. So in a sense, it was very easy to build on and say that, you know what, coronavirus was also produced in a secret laboratory. And as the COVID-19 crisis developed, we've also seen claims that the virus was originating from secret laboratories which encircle Russia in the post-Soviet countries, for example, Ukraine. And what is more, we've seen similar narratives amplified not only by pro-Kremlin sources, but also from sources originating in China. So in short, the situation is quite special because it exposes a lot of vulnerabilities in many senses that we have.
Fabrizio, I will combine actually 2 or 3 questions connected to something you said as well. So it's true that China has not been really on the radar until the COVID-19 crisis, but does it mean that China has been really innocent, or they had a different strategy until COVID-19? And what has changed? Because Borrell has also said that Europe has been very naive about China. So could we really actually say that this is the positive consequence of the COVID-19 crisis, that we are at least now aware of this threat?
Yes, in some way I fully agree with you. There is absolutely a new way of action of China, not only in the information campaign. It's a wider approach, and that's why several international relevant, the most important international organizations are obliged to take into consideration China, the growth of China, the only economy that will grow with the after the pandemic crisis. The COVID-19 is something unprecedented in terms of the speed in which it was circulating, in terms also of the impact, as I said before. Because, okay, there was the so-called Spanish flu at the beginning of the last century, but all the other, let's say, pandemic crises that we were experiencing more in much more recent years, like SARS, MERS, H5N1, and so on, even Ebola, they have been much more regional and contained. Today, because of the circulation, globalization, and interconnected world, it was much more easy, and also the kind of this virus. But coming to your question, and of course, as I say, China was changing an attitude. Just to give you an idea, there was there was a sentence, a declaration from the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China. The name is Hua Chunying. She said, we arrived, and I'm quoting, we arrived at the center of the scene, of the scenario, but still we were not able to grab the microphone. So that's the approach of China today, also in infodemic. And of course, they are trying to show that our Western system of government with our freedoms is not effective in responding to pandemic crisis, and not only to pandemic crisis. They are trying to demonstrate that they have a much more effective system to deal and to manage. That's why they were making this medical diplomacy and so on. And before, as I say, they were much more targeting national issues like Tibet, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and that. So it's absolutely a new way of a new arm in a wider and more complex and comprehensive strategy of China.
Thank you. We have received quite a few questions. I will try to go through them. So next question is from Yeva Valutite. Is analysis and exposure enough to counter well-organized disinformation efforts against the EU? The Russian and Chinese operations are on a different scale of magnitude, while the EU response remains at the task force level. At what point will the EU consider responding proportionally and develop more robust capabilities?
I guess this one is for me. I wouldn't agree that EU's response is at task force level. I think, yes, an important groundwork was done, but I think both action plan and the joint communication and upcoming policy initiatives such as European Democracy Action Plan, I would think so. They have this sort of comprehensive approach and a recognition of a comprehensive approach, because no matter how well-functioning task force one might create, it is actually a challenge that requires a lot of pulled effort. It requires investigative journalists, it requires fact-checking, it requires maybe certain adjustment to the way we learn and teach, for example, young people, I mean, kids or teenagers, how they interact in the social media platforms. So I think there is this recognition that it's a big task, broad task, and it requires really pulled effort. And I think it is going into a positive direction.
So the next question is also about youth and disinformation. As you know, we organize this with YPFP. So how could the EU and NATO further help raise awareness and protect youth in terms of malign information and propaganda, whether it's about COVID-19 or other world events? Raimonda, I don't know if you have any specific programs targeting youth or helping youth NGOs.
Well, yes, for example, but I will go back to sort of the Eastern Partnership. There we also participate with the EU Neighbors campaign and young European ambassadors, so young people who are active in the region and who themselves sometimes, you know, come up with ideas how to communicate with their peers, debunking certain disinformation campaigns. So where we can, we of course try to cooperate and help. Of course, as a task force, we know that, you know, we're not media, we're not a massive conglomerate. So our work sort of is based on the hope that if we communicate to expert audience, to people like you, to journalists, then these messages exposing disinformation can be amplified. So, you know, one of a simple thing, if you see something on, for example, Universal Disinfo that you think might be relevant, please do share. We are, for example, on Facebook and Twitter. We are not on TikTok, where I think the majority of a big part, at least, of young people are. So of course there are things to be done, and also I think it's also being aware. And this is another thing that we, and I mean collectively, we in the institutions try to do, is to recognize what matters for different audiences. Because you know, there's one issues which are more important for young people and you know, not so young people. So it also comes back to how do we make our communication more effective. So it's a long-term effort.
Fabrizio, do you know any initiatives from NATO side? Also maybe the Youth Atlantic Treaty Association. Are there any initiatives to raise awareness among young people?
This is the domain in which are much more focused, of course, in terms of the Atlantic Council and the Atlantic Treaty Association, and the youth component that is in some way our long arm on the social media. And here we have a great advantage in respect to other think tanks and organizations, because the extraordinary added value of the youth is that, first of all, they are the people that can much more faster check what is going on in the social media. And as I say, that over quite at the 90% of the disinformation is circulating there. And so, in my opinion, it's very important. Three key. I would like to outline three key issues anyway, because it's not only to check and to debunk. We will not win the war of countering disinformation if we are always remaining as we are now. That's the problem. As we are now, in a reactive way. We must adopt a proactive action, and to do this, we need, first of all, strategic communication. To have clear in our mind what we want to communicate in an easy, clear way, and the strategic communication from our side is a winning one. Because we are talking about freedoms, we are talking about free economy, free society, to increase and develop the human being, to gender issues, and all these issues are winning issues. So we must have a clear strategic communication strategy. But the second point is that, and this is the most difficult one, in free, has NATO 30 democratic countries, we have democratic debates, and so coordination of this strategic communication, it's difficult. And I would say that even if you go in the website of our main international institutions, you can find the main web page that is made probably by the proper division for information. But at the same time, you have the corner of the High Representative or the Secretary General that is made by the private office and somebody else. But at the same time, we have at least NATO some strategic commands that they have their own public information officers. So coordination of our information between NATO, EU, UN on basic and fundamental values on this specific area that we are addressing, and using the youth components that are the long arms. For instance, in the Youth Atlantic Treaty Association, we are able to spread a message in 20 different languages at the same time. This is the coordination that I am trying to achieve on our, let's say, environment. So it's important, and but of course you cannot do, and this is the third and in my opinion the most important element, you cannot do this with the resources that we are devoting right now to this critical issue. That, as I say, this is a critical issue on the security for national security and for international stability. And so we need to devote the proper resources to this area much more than what we are doing now, because we need to double the effort and we need to triple the resources.
Next question is for both of you, actually. It's about how we actually understand disinformation. What is disinformation? What is truth? And how we can counter actually not only disinformation, but also the growing phenomenon of so-called post-truth as your own personal truth to the detriment of research and objective facts. In other words, people who only look for data to validate their own theories and often conspiracy theories. So even when you actually find out a disinformation, how do you really convince people that this is not the truth?
Well,
it's a bit philosophical as well, but on the other hand, it's a real challenge, because so many people, I think, they believe in certain news, and it is very difficult to convince them that no, it's not true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very big question, and not the one that is easy to answer. It also goes again to the vulnerabilities that exist both in the way we consume news and in the way, for example, media systems work in different places, you know, echo chambers and things like that. I would say that not everything is so gloomy. For example, some partners that we cooperate with, and I'm going to go back to Ukraine, they did a survey recently, and what the survey show is that people tend to trust information more if they had seen it before. And that is true both for misleading information, but also and especially true for the debunking or for actual information. So just being out there and having your message heard actually works. And that is somewhat encouraging. It is, of course, I think this is a question, yeah, leading really maybe to, to the school, to how do we act as responsible individuals in the current social media and general information space, and how do we learn to consume information? We live in the world where each of us has to be their own editor in a way, especially in the way we look at the social media. Having said that, there's also some encouraging signs. For example, that we see that the quality journalism is not dead, and it's demanded and it's required, and it proved, very, very important again during the COVID-19 crisis. So that is, these are small steps, but put together, I believe they make a difference. But really, to comprehensively solve that problem, I think we need to go back really to maybe middle school.
Fabrizio, would you like to add something, or should I go ahead with the next question?
No, I just can say that two things. First of all, the quality of the journalism, the quality of the media, and the trust on the quality. And here you have a twofold way of doing the things, because you have a very clever private journalist, but at the same time that they are recognized as authorities in the journalism, and this it's very important. It's much more easy to work with them. But at the same time, it's very important also that the official communication coming from the institutions, it's clear, it's checked, and sometimes this was not happening, particularly on COVID-19. If I can tell you the experience that we had here in Italy, here it was certified everything, and the contrary also everything, in terms of the use of mask or not, the use of the gloves or not, how many days, how many meters of distance you have to. So it's important to give a clear message to the public opinion. Public opinion will evaluate. And of course, to do this, we need to improve and to support. And again, here is the issue of resources, the quality, the good journalism, and in my opinion, the truth and our values are winning. We need to promote them in a proactive way.
If I just may add, one thing that I didn't say, again, just to sort of agree with what Fabrizio said also about the importance of the media and authoritative information. So Fabrizio also earlier mentioned the study by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. So during the COVID height of the pandemic, they actually conducted a study, or presented the results of the study that was conducted across 6 countries: Argentina, Germany, South Korea, Spain, UK, and US. And basically they were asking how people accessed information about COVID and how they rated the trustworthiness of different sources. And so what that survey found is that very high number of peoples across countries, across age groups and level of educations thought or rated the information from the scientists and doctors and health experts as trustworthy. A majority of people, around 3/4, said that news organizations are relatively trustworthy, and majority found social media platforms less trustworthy than experts, for example. So I think these are encouraging findings, which basically show that, well, again, not everything is gloomy. People are still rational beings. And provided that authoritative information is there, I think most of us can make the distinction.
Next question is actually connected to what you said, Fabrizio, about our authorities, governments, and how they communicate messages as well. It's from Loic Bisson from Klingendal Institute. Beyond rouge actors like Russia fueling fake news about COVID-19, has the inconsistency of health authorities, mask, no mask, lockdown, no lockdown, etc., eroded the role and standing of experts in Europe? Isn't there also a need for introspection and lessons learned on how should governments better communicate on highly technical and emotional issues so they don't fuel fake news themselves?
Yes, I don't want to repeat myself, but I think that this is the way in which we need to approach this problem, this issue. And we need to coordinate better, to work much more on strategic communication, and in a much more in a strategic communication and in a much more coordinated manner. This is true at the national level, but this is particularly true at the international level, because the sharing of best practice, even intelligence, is very important. And here at NATO, we have a new division for intelligence that can work with all the situation centers and many other task forces and bodies that we have in the European Union, and also at the OSCE. We need to take into consideration, we were not mentioning, but the OSCE can play a relevant role when we are talking about the freedom of the media and to guarantee the truth and so on. So if we put together all the tools that we have in a much more coordinated manner, we will have for sure an extraordinary added value. But again, having said that, we need to work in a much more highly professional way with much more resources.
Raimonda, would you like to add something?
Well, really, I think it's true in the sense that COVID-19 presented a quite a unique challenge, and I think it has been a learning curve for all actors involved, both for us as citizens, both for us as people working in institutions or in states governments. I would just maybe again like to repeat that we as the consumers of information also have to be aware of where we are vulnerable. What I said before, in the way that we need and we're used to quick answers, but we need to accept at some point that there are no quick answers, and sort of have enough trust in the authorities that, for example, scientific authorities, that they will be provided. So it's also, I think, a learning curve for all of us, really.
We are already 2 minutes past 32, and we still have 7 questions. So I apologize if I cannot take all questions, but I will conclude maybe with one final question from Jeffrey from YPFP. Should strategic communications and information operations be standardized in some ways to facilitate multinational operations? Or would this risk imposing an unnecessary rigid framework that would hinder efforts? This is also, we can, I think, connect to what extent we can really create better cooperation channels between EU countries, but then also between EU, NATO, EU, US, but also our partners in the Western Balkans and the EU's neighborhood. Fabrizio, would you like to start? We don't hear you. Sorry, could you please?
Yes, sorry. I was not getting exactly the point that you want to specifically to be addressed. So if you can specify a little bit better, please.
Sorry. How and if we can really cooperate and increase our efforts in terms of strategic communications, dealing with disinformation and propaganda, and how realistic to do it between different partners. So within the EU, it works to a certain extent, but is it possible to extend this to NATO, to US, but also potentially to other like-minded countries and EU's neighborhood?
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Now, absolutely clear. I would say that in this kind of coordination already is there. And NATO and EU are working on this, let me say, in a more wider perimeter, that is the hybrid that is in the hybrid domain. They are working very effectively together, and so sharing best practices, as I said before, also intelligence now, and so this is very, very important to have this type of connection. And we need to take into consideration that we have over 22 countries from both the organization that are member of NATO and EU. And at the level of NATO, you have also the United States, so you have also the transatlantic perspective. Plus, if we take the partnerships of NATO and the partnerships and the programs even wider in terms of contents and dimension and so on, coming from the European Union, we have global partners across the globe with real democracies in New Zealand, Australia, South Korea, Japan, and so on, while European Union goes also to other dimensions, regional dimensions. So I think that there is the network on which we can build. The platform is there, the structures are there, and we have to counter a structured disinformation. And but I think that the power that we have in our free democracies, I mentioned how many countries we are together, is absolutely much more. So it's just a term of coordination, higher coordination, because we just defined this infodemic this February. So we certify that we have now a new challenge, a new threat probably, that we have to address. And so we need to all together to be effective in this new challenge.
Raimon, the same question, but maybe I can add one more element, because I imagine that you also try to reach out to the Eastern Partnership countries, Ukraine. Do you cooperate, or how do you cooperate with these countries while working on these issues?
Well, certainly. Just coming back a little bit to the first iteration of the question, if I understood correctly, there was also within the question there was an element of standardized strategic communication campaigns. I'm not sure if I understand it correctly, but the way I understand it, it brought to my mind probably the first rule of communication, and the first rule of communication is know your audience. So the standardization has its limits in a sense, because what could be recognizable and dear to one audience could be totally alien for another, which leads me to your next question. Of course, we work very closely, firstly with the EU delegations in the respective countries, as well as researchers there in civil society. For example, just last November, we had a big event in Georgia, which pulled together experts and journalists and people working with these issues, both from Eastern Partnership, but also Western Balkans and the MENA region. So having those local voices and local perspectives and seeing how we can together tackle those challenges on the ground, of course, is also a very important element of our work. Because as I said, I think the disinfo actors, they do know their audiences. They're quite good at what they're doing. And so we have to know our audiences as well.
Well, I would like to thank our speakers and also our partners for joining us today and supporting this event. Our next event under our disinformation program will be next week on 16th. It will be on Italy in Italian, and on 17th, we will have an event on disinformation efforts of Russia and China in the Western Balkans and Turkey. So we are looking forward to also for you to joining us next week as well. Thank you very much and have a nice evening.